Good evening, everyone. I'm going to return to my roots a little bit and discuss Ontario politics. The Conservatives have disappointed me quite a lot today, and they released this tweet talking about how they'll be teaching gender identity in Ontario classrooms. That is a huge letdown, and I will tell you why. I want to start with a disclaimer, though. I am not a transphobe, despite being called a transphobe recently for saying this is a terrible idea. I have no problem with adults making choices as adults after they're 18 years of age or older. What you do with your body as an adult, in my personal opinion, is your business, so long as it doesn't hurt another person, right? You're not allowed to wield a hammer and hit somebody in the face because that hurts somebody. But if you want to wield a hammer and hit something concrete or something like that, so long as it's not my property, you have a good old time with that. No problem. Your choices are your own to make when you're an adult. However, when you're under 18 years of age and in the care of a school, you should be cared for by your parents, and final decisions should be left to your parents up until they're hurting you physically, right? You as a parent shouldn't ever be able to make a decision that hurts your child, period. And I think we have laws on the books about that. You can't abuse your children. People make phone calls. However, that system is being abused, and I'll show you how it's being abused. But we're going to get to that. So first, I'm going to show you the tweet talking about the new system, and then we're going to listen to a sex researcher talk about binary gender and how that is biologically correct, because it is biologically correct. Less than 1% of people are transgender. And, well, I'm not a sex researcher, so I'm going to let her talk, not me. All of the links are in the description. I encourage you to watch the whole Deborah Soh talk. But first, Caroline Mulroney is tweeting, quote, "Our government held the largest public consultation on education in Ontario's history. This new version on education will bring Ontario's classroom into the new century and prepare our students with greater learning and skilled trades opportunities." And I want to see if, before I get into this, before I get off on my tangents, because I will get into tangents, I want to know if the consultations will be made public. I want to see how this gender theory stuff got in there, because it is a theory, it is not a fact. Biological fact has two genders, gender as binary. And here's Miss Deborah Soh to talk about that. So I want to know which consultations had more weight, and I want to see them. It should be a transparent process. Where's the consultations? It should be a big PDF dumped on a government website somewhere that nobody looks at because nobody cares about, because it's ridiculously boring. But I want that data. Where is it? Okay, here's Deborah Soh. And we're just going to listen. We're not going to actually watch, because I don't know if this is a copywritten talk or whatever, but we're just going to listen to the first 30 seconds.
Okay. So I spent 11 years in academia as a sex researcher, and I still have absolutely no idea why anyone thinks there are 71 different genders. Let me get one thing out of the way. Gender is binary, and it is not a social construct. That should really be the end of my talk today.
And it will be for this point, or for the point of my presentation, but please do go watch the whole 13 minutes. It is so worthwhile. Okay, here's another article I came across today, and it is, in their own words, the article title is, in their own words, "Parents of kids who think they are trans speak out." And here is the story that I'm going to highlight. Quote, "I was shocked when my 13-year-old daughter told me she was really my misgendered son. She had no masculine interests and hated all sports, but as a smart, quirky teen on the autism spectrum, she had a long history of not fitting in with girls. Where did she get the idea she was transgender? From a school presentation at a school where over 5% of the student body called themselves trans or non-binary, and where several students were already on hormones, and one had a mastectomy at the age of 16. In my daughter's world, in real life and online, transgender identities are common and hormones and surgeries are no big deal. I took her to a gender clinician, seeking expert guidance. Instead, he accepted her new identity and told me I must refer to my daughter with masculine pronouns, call her by a masculine name, and buy her a binder to flatten her breasts. He recommended no therapy, and there was no consideration of the social factors that obviously affected her thinking. I was directed to put her on puberty-blocking drugs. I was falsely assured that these drugs were well studied and they were a perfectly safe way for her to, quote, explore gender. I was told that if I did not comply, she would be at higher risk of suicide. I have nowhere to go for proper help. Therapists are actively trained and socially pressured not to question these increasingly common identities. In Washington, D.C., and many states with so-called conversion therapy bans, questioning a child's belief that she is on the opposite sex is against the law. I have been living this nightmare for over 4 years, and despite my best efforts, my daughter plans to medically transition when she turns 18 later this year. Parents like me must remain anonymous to maintain our children's privacy, and because we face legal repercussions if our names are revealed. Parents who do not support their children's gender identity risk being reported to Child Protective Services and losing custody of their children. In New Jersey, the Department of Education officially encourages schools to report such parents. Meanwhile, media glamorize and celebrate trans-identified children while ignoring stories like mine. I've written to well over 100 journalists begging them to write about what is happening to kids. I wrote my representative and senators, but have been ignored by their staff. My online posts about my daughter's story have been deleted, and I've been permanently banned in online forums. As a lifelong Democrat, I'm outraged by my former party and find it ironic that only conservative news outlets have reported my story without bias or censorship. We parents are ignored and vilified while our children are suffering in the name of inclusivity and acceptance. I hope that some open-minded Democratic lawmakers will wake up to the fact that they are complicit in harming vulnerable kids. I hope that they ask themselves this question: why are physicians medicalizing children in the name of an unproven, malleable gender identity? And why are lawmakers enshrining gender identity into state and federal laws? Yeah, why are they ramming it down our throats? Why are the schools training children on a gender theory? It is not a proven fact. It is a gender theory that totally disregards proven science. Gender and sex is binary for over 99% of the population. Really. Here's a Reddit thread, and it was posted today, and Reddit is not very good at keeping up things that go against the narrative that the left wants to push. So this is actually an archive link to this. But here is a trans woman who regrets having surgery. I'm a trans woman, 5 years post-op. I regret bottom surgery. Ask me any questions, but keep your tone polite, please. I'm just going to scroll down, but here is the questions and answers in a table of contents. It's about a quarter of the way down the page. And it's, the question is here, why do you regret it? And the fact that it still doesn't feel real. The fact that the surgery didn't truly give me female genitalia. I'd rather have this feeling that I have a refashioned penis between my legs. I still think about myself as a man who wants to be a woman. That sounds like, a mental health disorder. Which, if you delude yourself into thinking that cutting your penis off will make you a woman, I have to tell you, the difference between a man and a woman is the ability to bear children, not necessarily having a vagina. So if you can't bear children, sorry, buddy, you're just a man without a penis. That's it. Like, bearing children is the important part. So the Ford government has seriously disappointed me today, and CTV News is reporting increased high school class sizes, sex ed curriculum among Ontario education reforms. Education reforms announced by the progressive conservative government Friday also include introducing a sex ed curriculum that returns to teaching gender identity and consent after a modernized lesson plan was scrapped, revamping the math curriculum and making students take more online courses. It's interesting how they lump it all together, but they break it up a little bit further on. Quote, back to the article, our plan will modernize the classroom, will protect the future of our education system, and will ensure Ontario's students acquire the skills they need to build successful lives, families, and businesses, said Education Minister Lisa Thompson. Ms. Thompson, I dare you to come on this show and explain to me just how giving these children information on an unproven gender theory that is actually contagious and harmful will help them in any way, please come and explain it to me. And I'm going to get to the second part of my statement there in just a minute, but I'm going to finish this article here first. Back to the article. The Tories, in a move to cater to social conservatives, scrapped a modernized curriculum brought in by the Liberals that addressed consent, online bullying, sexting, same-sex relationships, and gender identity. The new document will return to teaching those lessons, but in some cases will do so when students are older. Gender identity, for instance, will now be taught in grade 8 after previously being taught earlier under the Liberals. The curriculum will also include teaching on abstinence and lessons on cannabis. Parents will still be able to opt out of having their kids exposed to certain topics in the sex ed class, and the government will issue online modules for those who want guidance on discussing those topics at home. The full curriculum is expected to be released in May and implemented in September. So call your MPP if you live in Ontario. Here's the Federalist reporting on the Ivy League study. And we'll look at the actual study in just a minute, but I wanted to show you. It says, explosive Ivy League study repressed for finding transgender kids may be a social contagion. Quote, rapid onset gender dysphoria may be a social contagion linked with having friends who identify as LGBT and identity politics culture and an increase in internet use, finds a Brown University study. Now, all studies and surveys and all of this data is just that and can be manipulated to say a whole lot of things. But have a read through this, and here's the actual study. Okay, so I've highlighted some important parts. The abstract is at the beginning and kind of encapsulates the whole paper, but I'll get into the important parts in just a minute. Okay, so the purpose. In online forums, parents have been reporting that their children are experiencing what is described here as, quote, rapid onset gender dysphoria, appearing for the first time during puberty or even after its completion. The onset of gender dysphoria seems to occur in the context of belonging to a peer group where one, multiple, or even all of the friends have become gender dysphoric and transgender identified during the same time frame. Parents also report that their children exhibited an increase in social media internet use prior to the disclosure of transgender identity. The purpose of this study was to document and explore these observations and describe the resulting presentation of gender dysphoria, which is inconsistent with existing research literature. And the results: there were 256 parent-completed surveys. That's a small sample, by the way. 256 is a small sample, but maybe keep that in mind, okay? That met the study criteria. The adolescent and young adult, AYA, children described were predominantly female sex at birth, 82% female, with a mean age of 16.4 years. 41% of the AYAs had expressed non-heterosexual sexual orientation before identifying as transgender, so less than half. Many, 62.5% of the AYAs, had been diagnosed with at least one mental health disorder or neurodevelopmental disability prior to the onset of their gender dysphoria. Range of the number of pre-existing diagnoses, 0 to 7. In 36.8% of the friendship groups described, the majority of the members became transgender identified. The most likely outcomes were that AYA mental well-being and parent-child relationships became worse since AYAs, quote, came out. AYAs expressed a range of behaviors that included expressing distrust of non-transgender people, stopping spending time with non-transgender friends, trying to isolate themselves from their families, and only trusting information about gender dysphoria from transgender sources. Conclusion: rapid onset gender dysphoria describes a phenomenon where the development of gender dysphoria is observed to begin suddenly during or after puberty in an adolescent or young adult who would not have met criteria for gender dysphoria in childhood. ROGD appears to represent an entity that is distinct from the gender dysphoria observed in individuals who have previously been described as transgender. The worsening of mental well-being and parent-child relationships and behaviors that isolate AYAs from their parents, families, non-transgender friends, and mainstream sources of information are particularly concerning. More research is needed to better understand this phenomenon, its implications, and scope. And I wanted to show this part, not that part. This part, the social and peer contagion part, because it's really important to understand that this is not just something that they're attributing to this transgender identity stuff. This is something that has a long history of, well, social contagion happens, and it has happened for years, especially in tight populations, right? High school is a very small little city within a city, right? You know everybody in the high school most of the time in a small town anyway. Okay, so the description of cluster outbreaks of gender dysphoria occurring in pre-existing group of friends and increased exposure to social media, internet preceding a child's announcement of a transgender identity raises the possibility of social and peer contagion. Social contagion is the spread of affect or behaviors through a population. Peer contagion, in particular, is the process where an individual and peer mutually influence each other in a way that promotes emotions and behaviors that can potentially undermine their own development or harm others. Peer contagion has been associated with depressive symptoms, disorder eating, aggression, bullying, and drug use. Internalizing symptoms such as depression can be spread via the mechanisms of co-rumination, which entails the repetitive discussion of problems, excessive reassurance seekers, ERS, and negative feedback. Deviancy training, which was first described for rule breaking, delinquency, and aggression, is the process whereby attitudes and behaviors associated with problem behaviors are promoted within positive reinforcement by peers. And so they're saying that we see the deviancies being promoted and people getting positive reinforcement and the media ignoring all of the bad stories all the time. And that was talked about here. And if you've seen like the drag kid or Desmond or I think it's Desmond the Amazing or something like that, you've seen an example of this absolute illness to continually promote this idea that if you've got problems, maybe you're just the wrong gender and we'll just do a surgery and bam. And if you're a male going to a female, have you played any sports? Because you might be a medal winner, right? It seems really, really crazy. Now for the cherry on top. The other article I was talking about was an American, well, this one, the parental stories, it was an American article, right? Like there are more Americans than Canadians. It's easier to find American sources. This is a Canadian show, but it's an American article. So maybe the idea of child services showing up and removing your child because you are not agreeing with their gender identity, which is again is an unproven theory and does not reflect actual observed science for 99% of people. Here's the Toronto Star reporting, you could lose your children. And I'm not understating that. I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying the BC Supreme Court has upheld the child under 18, and the person is 16 years old, their right to make this decision, which is just incredible. Against all precedent of law for the most part in Western world. You generally can't do this over your parents' head against your parents' wishes. Anyway, here's the Toronto Star reporting, quote, misgendering kids and preventing transitioning can constitute child abuse, BC Supreme Court rules. Whew, this was March 12th. Courts have ruled in favor of a teenager who wants medical treatment in his gender transition despite the opposition of his father in a ruling that grants trans kids more legal rights and protections. Last month, the BC Supreme Court ruled that a teenager with the support of multiple doctors and healthcare workers can start hormone therapy even though his father thinks he's not mature enough to make such a decision. Yeah. The father appealed the decision on March 4th. And I don't know if that means it goes right to the Canada Supreme Court. If it does, I can hope that Mr. Trudeau is not in office when that happens. Anyway, this is a terrible precedent to set in Canada. It is very, very concerning. And as I said, when you're an adult, when you're 18 years old, by all means, you have every right available to you in Canada. You are an adult and you can chart your own destiny. But I hope you have the wherewithal to think and listen to the people who care about you before you make a decision that you'll potentially regret. And I'm not talking just for myself. I'm talking from this person's perspective. And I mean, this person is a person who's answering an AMA, Ask Me Anything on Reddit. But when a surgery to change your gender doesn't solve your problem, and you actually still feel just like you, except you had a big long surgery and you're missing a piece or you've gained a piece or whatever it is, and that doesn't solve your problem, where do you go, right? Like usually, and transgendered people have a very high suicide rate. So why encourage children who have yet to to even cross the threshold into adulthood to make that decision. Why, Doug Ford? And I voted for you, sir. Why train our children? Why bring it into our classrooms in the first place when there's evidence that this is not a good thing to be teaching children at all? And it is certainly not proven by science. This is a theory, and I'll say it again, a theory that flies in the face of proven biological science. Gender is binary, and that's not me saying that. That's Miss Deborah Soh, and she's been a sex researcher for 11 years. So I find Doug Ford's inclusion of gender theory offensive. I find it untenable. And I think that if Mr. Bernier is even medium successful in October with his party, People's Party, I think that we see a People's Party in Ontario rise up as well. Because if this is what the Conservative Party is offering, well, thanks but no thanks. Ridiculous. Absolutely offensive and ridiculous. Conservative Party and Miss Mulroney, Mr. Ford, get your head out of your ass. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks for watching.